The whiskey struck his face like a liquid slap. Elijah Cross had just entered the saloon seeking only one thing, a quiet drink to forget. But before he could reach the bar, an entire bottle of whiskey exploded against his face. "Look at this pathetic old man," roared Marcus Kane. "The Viper, leader of the Red Serpent gang. His laughter was pure poison. Have you come to beg, grandfather?" Elijah stood in the middle of the saloon, whiskey dripping from his gray beard, soaking his worn black coat. He said nothing, did not move. His steel-gray eyes simply stared into the void. The 8 men of Cain surrounded him like wolves circling wounded prey. Another thug emptied his glass over Elijah's head, then another and another. The amber liquid ran down his face, his neck, staining his clothes. The bartender, Old Pete, dropped the glass he was cleaning. It shattered against the floor. "God have mercy," he whispered, turning pale as a ghost. "What is wrong, old man?" Cain slapped him violently on the shoulder. "Can those trembling hands still hold a gun, or are they only good for begging?" Laughter, mockery, total humiliation. The entire saloon fell into sepulchral silence. The few customers present began to slip toward the exits. A woman stifled a scream. A man crossed himself because they knew something that Cain's gang did not. That old man, drenched in whiskey, standing motionless in the middle of the saloon, was not just any cowboy. 20 years ago, his name made outlaws flee across state borders. His legend was written in blood across 15 territories. They called him the Reaper of Tombstone Creek, and Marcus Kane had just made the last mistake of his short and stupid life. The atmosphere in the saloon had transformed from casual evening chatter to deadly tension in mere moments. The old wooden floorboards creaked under the weight of the circling gang members, each one eager to prove himself to their leader. The dim light from oil lamps cast long shadows across the room, making the scene appear even more ominous. Elijah remained perfectly still, his breathing steady and controlled, despite the whiskey burning his eyes and the humiliation seeping into every fiber of his being. He had come to this God-forsaken town specifically because nobody knew him here, or so he thought. It was the anniversary of Sarah's death, and all he wanted was one quiet drink to remember her by, to toast to her memory in solitude. Instead, he found himself surrounded by young fools who had no idea what they had awakened. The whiskey continued to drip from his beard, forming small puddles on the wooden floor beneath him. His coat, once fine black leather, now worn and faded from years of hard living, clung to his frame, heavy with the soaked alcohol. His hands hung loosely at his sides, not threatening, not defensive, simply present. But those who knew how to look, those who understood the language of violence, would have seen the coiled tension in his posture, the way his weight was distributed perfectly for rapid movement, the slight angle of his body that would allow him to draw and fire in a fraction of a heartbeat. "Come on, grandfather." Cain pulled out another bottle, this time cheap tequila. "Open your mouth. I am going to give you a drink like the dog you are." Elijah finally spoke. His voice was low, hoarse, like stones dragging across a dry riverbed. "Son, you are making a mistake." Cain exploded in laughter. "The only mistake here is that you are still breathing." Axe Johnson, Cain's second in command, a brute with a scar crossing his entire face, pushed Elijah backward. The old cowboy took a staggering step but did not fall. "The boss is right," growled Axe. "You stink of failure and desperation. How long has it been since you ate? How long since you had an honest job?" The other 6 men formed a tight circle around Elijah. Snake Eyes Tommy, the Marx brothers Cole and Clayton, Knife Jim, Fast Draw Charlie, the Giant Moose Henderson, and Travis, the youngest, barely 19 years old, with eyes hungry for violence. "Let us take off his boots," suggested Travis with a cruel smile. "I bet he has the dirtiest feet in the West." "Better idea," said Cain, pulling out his revolver. He pressed it against Elijah's forehead. Click. "Oh, what now, old man? What are you going to do?" Elijah smiled. It was a terrible smile. "You are going to find out." The tension in the room became almost unbearable. Even the air seemed to thicken with anticipation. The few remaining patrons had pressed themselves against the walls, trying to become invisible, knowing that something terrible was about to unfold. Old Pete had ducked behind the bar completely, his weathered hands shaking as he reached for the shotgun he kept hidden beneath the counter. though he knew it would be useless against what was coming. The gang members were too confident, too young, too inexperienced to recognize the signs. They saw only an old man, alone, outnumbered 8-1, soaked in whiskey and seemingly defenseless. They did not see the legend. They did not see the 2 decades of hard living that had honed this man into something more dangerous than any of them could imagine. They did not see the countless gunfights that had been burned into his muscle memory, the 1,000 small movements and calculations that his body could perform without conscious thought. They did not see the pain of loss that had driven him to become something inhuman, something that killed with the efficiency and emotion of a natural disaster. "Do you know who I am?" asked Elijah, his voice still calm as water before a storm. "A nobody," spat Kane. "My name is Elijah Cross." The saloon froze. Even Kane blinked, confused. The name sounded familiar, but he could not place it. But old Pete could. "Merciful God," he whispered, letting himself fall behind the bar. "It is him. It is the Reaper." Snake eyes. Tommy took an involuntary step backward. The Reaper of Tombstone Creek. "That is an old wives' tale," said Cole Marks, but his voice trembled. "That guy is dead. He died 10 years ago." "I let people think that," Elijah responded. "It turns out that dying is the best way to live in peace." Slowly, with deliberate movements, he wiped the whiskey from his eyes with his coat sleeve. "I came here only for a drink, a quiet whiskey on the anniversary of my wife's death. That was all I wanted." Wait. Kane lowered his weapon, his mind racing. "Elijah Cross, the marshal who killed 43 men in one night." 43, confirmed Elijah. The Dalton brothers' gang had burned Tombstone Creek. They killed women, children. "My wife." His voice broke slightly on that last word, then hardened again like tempered iron. "I tracked them for 3 weeks through the desert. I gave them a chance to surrender." They laughed. By dawn, 43 men were dead. The revelation hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. The name Elijah Cross, the Reaper of Tombstone Creek, was not just legend in these parts. It was the kind of story that mothers told their children to keep them from straying into a life of crime. It was the cautionary tale that old-timers shared around campfires, each retelling adding more blood, more bodies, more impossible feats of marksmanship and violence. But like all legends, most people assumed it was exaggeration, myth, the kind of tall tale that grew in the telling until it bore no resemblance to reality. The truth, as these young fools were about to discover, was that the legend had not done justice to the man. If anything, it had understated his capabilities. The 43 men he had killed that night in Tombstone Creek had not been farmers or shopkeepers. They had been hardened outlaws, men who had survived gunfights and robberies across half the territories. And Elijah Cross had gone through them like death itself, methodical, unstoppable, merciless, not because he enjoyed killing, but because they had taken everything from him, and justice, real justice, demanded payment in blood. "That was 20 years ago," said Axe Johnson, recovering some courage. "You are old now, slow, finished." "Perhaps," admitted Elijah, "but you are still 8 idiots who do not know when to run." Travis, the young one, drew his revolver nervously. "I am not afraid of any old man with stories. Stories keep smart men alive. Fools like you become stories." Kane studied the old cowboy. The whiskey continued to drip from his beard. His clothes were soaked, but there was something in his posture, in the way his hands hung near his weapons, that made Kane's survival instinct scream danger. "Very well, Reaper. Show us that legends are real. Boys, kill him." 8 hands went to 8 guns, but Elijah was already moving. Time slowed. Elijah saw everything with the clarity born of 1,000 fights. Travis to his left, too nervous, would shoot first but would miss. Axe to his right, professional, would aim for center mass. Kane in front, still hesitating. Elijah's hand moved, not fast like in his youth, but efficient, economical, without a single wasted movement. His coat opened, his Colt emerged, silver and immortal, and before Travis could complete his draw, the first shot resonated like thunder. Travis's revolver flew from his hand before he could pull it completely from his belt. The young man screamed, looking at his bleeding hand in shock. Bang, bang, bang! Elijah spun his body, remembering movements engraved in muscle memory. The Marks brothers had drawn their weapons. They were fast, very fast, but he was more precise. Colmark screamed when the bullet pierced his shoulder. Clayton took a shot to the thigh and fell to his knees. 3 shots, 3 men down. 4 seconds elapsed. "Scatter!" roared Kane, finally reacting. "Do not stay together!" But panic had already begun. Snake Eyes Tommy fired wildly, his bullets shattering bottles behind the bar. Elijah dropped to the floor, rolling behind an overturned table with an agility that belied his age. Bang, bang, bang. Bullets perforated the wood above his head. Splinters exploded into the air, but Elijah had already drawn his second Colt. Yes, he carried 2, 1 for each hand, and was firing back. Bang. Snake Eyes. Tommy grabbed his arm and fell, his weapon sliding across the floor. The saloon had transformed into a war zone in less than 10 seconds. Gunsmoke filled the air, creating ghostly shadows that danced in the lamplight. The smell of gunpowder mixed with spilled whiskey and blood created an acrid perfume of violence. The walls were pockmarked with bullet holes. Bottles behind the bar shattered into glittering fragments, and the mirror that had once been Pete's pride had a spiderweb of cracks radiating from 3 separate bullet impacts. The sounds were deafening in the enclosed space, each gunshot echoing off the walls and ceiling, creating a thunderous symphony of destruction. The screams of wounded men, the curses of those still fighting, the splintering of wood and shattering of glass all combined into a hellish chorus. And through it all, Elijah moved like a ghost, like death incarnate. His movements precise and economical, every shot deliberate and accurate. He was not the fastest gun these men had ever seen, but he was the most efficient, the most deadly, because every movement served a purpose, every bullet found its mark, and there was no wasted motion, no hesitation, no mercy. "He is just one old man," shouted Axe Johnson. "We outnumber him. Attack him." Knife Jim charged from the left, firing while he ran. Moose Henderson, the 300-pound giant, charged from the right, his revolver roaring. Elijah stood up, both weapons raised, his eyes calculating angles, trajectories, timing. The saloon filled with gunpowder smoke and the smell of death. Bang, 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 bang. When the smoke cleared, Knife Jim was on the ground clutching his leg. Moose Henderson was staring at his empty hand, his weapon destroyed by a perfectly placed bullet. 5 down, 3 standing, and Elijah Cross had not even broken a sweat. Charlie Fast Draw Morrison was next to move. Unlike the others, Charlie had a reputation. He was fast, truly fast. He had won 5 duels in 3 states. "Reaper," said Charlie, his voice cold and professional. "I respect the legend, but I am faster." "Maybe," admitted Elijah, "but being fast only gets you to an early grave if you are not smart." Charlie smiled. His hands moved in a blur, but Elijah no longer played fair. He kicked a chair toward Charlie just as the gunslinger was drawing his weapon. The chair hit Charlie's knees, making him stumble. Bang! Charlie's shot went high, destroying a chandelier. Elijah's bullet was precise, going through Charlie's gun hand. The gunslinger howled. His career ended in an instant. "I told you," murmured Elijah. "Intelligence over speed." Kane and Axe Johnson were the only ones left standing. 6 of their men lay wounded and bleeding on the saloon floor. The easy ambush had turned into a nightmare. "Enough," said Kane, raising his hand. "Cease fire." Elijah did not lower his weapons. Wise decision. Kane spat blood. His broken nose was still bleeding profusely. "You just signed your death sentence, old man. Do you know who I am?" "An idiot who interrupted my drink. I am Marcus Kane. My father was Robert Kane. Do you remember that name?" Elijah went still. Yes, he remembered that name. Robert Kane had been one of the Dalton brothers, one of the 43 men he had killed in Tombstone Creek. "That is right," continued Kane, seeing the recognition in Elijah's eyes. "I spent 20 years looking for you. 20 years tracking every rumor, every clue. I built this gang specifically to hunt you. Your father was a murderer and a rapist. I read his wanted posters. I saw what he did in Silver Edge. He was my father." Kane's shout resonated in the saloon. "And I was a marshal doing my job." "No." Kane shook his head. "You were a killer with a badge, and now I am going to return the favor." He raised his weapon. Axe did the same. 2 against 1. The odds had finally turned against the Reaper. The confrontation had reached its critical moment. The saloon, once a place of relative peace and simple entertainment, had become a killing ground, littered with wounded men and broken furniture. The air was thick with tension, and the metallic scent of blood mixing with gunpowder and spilled alcohol. Elijah stood in the center of it all, his coat torn and stained, his face still dripping with the whiskey they had poured over him in mockery, his hands steady despite the arthritis that plagued them, despite the years that had stolen some of his speed. But speed was not everything in a gunfight. Accuracy mattered more. Positioning mattered more. And most importantly, the willingness to kill mattered more. Elijah had that willingness burned into his soul by the death of his wife, by the screams of innocence that still echoed in his nightmares, by the promise he had made and broken more times than he could count. He had tried to walk away from violence, tried to become something other than a killer, but violence had a way of finding him, dragging him back into the darkness no matter how hard he fought against it. "Before this starts," said Elijah, his weapon still pointing at Cain and Axe, "I want you to know the truth about your father." "Truth?" "The truth is you slaughtered him with 42 other men. Your father set fire to a building in Tombstone Creek, a building full of people, families, children, lies. There was a schoolteacher visiting that day. She was helping the local children learn to read." Elijah's eyes moistened. "Her name was Sarah. Sarah Cross, my wife." The saloon remained in sepulchral silence. "Your father locked her in that building along with 17 other people. I heard them scream as the flames consumed them. I tried to get in. My hands still have the scars from the burns." Elijah raised his free hand. Cain could see the old burn marks, twisted and shiny. "I reached the door. I could see Sarah through the smoke. She screamed my name, reached her hand toward me, and the roof collapsed. The last thing she said was, 'Promise me you will stop killing. Find peace.'" "No," whispered Cain, his conviction beginning to crumble. "My father was not. He would not do that." "Pete was there," said Elijah. "Ask him, behind the bar." Pete nodded miserably. "It is true, Mr. Cain. I saw everything. Your father was a monster, and the Reaper tried to save everyone. He almost died trying." Axe Johnson looked at Cain, confused. "Boss, is it true?" Cain stood paralyzed, his entire world collapsing. 20 years of hate. 20 years building toward this moment, all based on a lie he had told himself. "I kept my promise to Sarah. I stopped being a marshal. I stopped hunting men. I disappeared. I spent 10 years trying to be better." He lowered his weapon slightly. "But you would not let me be better. So now you have to choose, son. You can lower your weapon and live, or you can pull that trigger and find out if the legend is real." Cain trembled. His finger was on the trigger. His entire life had been a lie. "Shoot!" roared Axe. "Do not listen to his tricks." Marcus Cain's finger trembled on the trigger. His mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. 20 years. 20 years living for this moment. "Boss," insisted Axe, "it is a trick. He is manipulating us." But Cain looked into Elijah's eyes, saw the genuine pain there, saw the scars on his hands, saw a man who had lost everything, just like him. "My father," began Cain, his voice broken. "My father was my hero. He told me that you ambushed them, that you were corrupt bounty hunters." "He lied to you," Elijah interrupted gently. "Parents sometimes do that to protect their children from the truth." "No." Cain raised his weapon completely. I cannot accept that everything was a lie." "Then shoot," said Elijah, opening his arms. "Kill the man who tried to save innocence. Kill the man who lost his wife just like you lost your father. Become what he was." Tears ran down Cain's beaten face. I do not know what to do." "Yes, you do," responded Elijah. "You can choose to be different. You can break the cycle." But the shot did not come from Cain. It came from Axe Johnson, who had lost patience. His bullet flew toward Elijah. The Reaper moved by instinct, spinning his body. The bullet grazed his left side, burning through his shirt. Pain exploded in his ribs, but his right hand was already raised. Bang! Axe Johnson fell backward, a perfectly round hole in his right shoulder. Not dead. Elijah still kept his promise not to kill unless he had no choice, but definitely out of the fight. Elijah staggered, pressing his hand against his bleeding side. He was no longer young. His body could not take punishment like before. Cain was still standing, his weapon pointing at Elijah. The old cowboy was wounded, vulnerable. It was the perfect moment. "Do it!" gasped Elijah. If you are going to do it now. Kane's finger squeezed the trigger 1 more millimeter, and it would all be over. Then he lowered his weapon. No. I am not going to be him. Kane dropped his revolver to the floor. The sound of metal hitting wood resonated like a church bell in the silent saloon. You just saved my life, said Elijah, still pressing his bleeding side. Why? Because Sarah was right, responded Kane, his voice hollow. The cycle has to break at some point. If not, what are we? Just killing machines taking revenge on each other until nobody is left. Old Pete came out from behind the bar with clean rags. Mr. Cross, you need to have Dr. Hendricks look at that. In a minute, grunted Elijah. He looked at Kane. What are you going to do now? Kane looked around the destroyed saloon, 6 of his men moaning on the floor, Axe unconscious. His entire life based on a lie. I do not know, admitted Kane. My whole life I have been this, the son of Robert Kane, the man who was going to avenge his father. Now I do not know who I am. You are a man with a choice, said Elijah. Just like me 20 years ago. You can choose to continue being a criminal, or you can choose to be something better. The saloon doors burst open. Sheriff Tom Crawford entered with 4 deputies, weapons drawn. Nobody move, ordered Crawford. Then he saw the carnage. What the hell happened here? Self-defense, Sheriff, said Old Pete quickly. This gang came in and attacked Mr. Cross here. He only defended himself. Crawford studied the scene. He recognized several of the fallen men from wanted posters. The Red Serpent Gang. His eyes widened. There are combined bounties of almost $30,000 in this room. Elijah shook his head. I do not want the bounties. Give them to the widows and orphans of their victims. Generous for a man who just fought for his life, observed Crawford. Then he looked at Kane more closely. Wait, I know you. You are Marcus Kane. You have $8,000 on your head. Kane did not resist when the deputies put handcuffs on him. I deserve much more than that, Sheriff. Kane, Elijah called out. The young man turned. There is a good lawyer in Silver City. Name is Samuel Brooks. Tell him Elijah Cross sent you. He will help you. Why help me? Because someone once helped me when I did not deserve it, and because Sarah would have wanted me to. The aftermath of the gunfight left the saloon in ruins, but also left something else in its wake. The possibility of redemption. As the deputies led Kane away, the young man looked back at Elijah one more time. And in that look was understanding, gratitude, and the beginning of change. The other gang members were being tended to by Dr. Hendricks, who had arrived with his medical bag and a disapproving scowl. None of the wounds were fatal. Elijah had been careful about that. But several of the men would never use their gun hands the same way again. Charlie Fast Draw Morrison would never draw fast again. Snake eyes. Tommy would have limited vision. The Marx brothers would walk with limps. Each wound was a lesson, a permanent reminder that violence has consequences, that reputation means nothing against skill, and that legends become legends for a reason. As Hendricks cleaned and bandaged Elijah's side, the old gunfighter sat in silence, his mind wandering back through the years to Sarah, to Tombstone Creek, to the promise he had made and the life he had tried to build after losing everything. 3 weeks later, Elijah Cross sat on the porch of the boarding house, his side bandaged but healing. Dr. Hendricks had done good work. Axe's bullet had grazed the ribs without permanent damage. The town of Redemption Creek treated him like a hero now. People bowed when he passed. Children looked at him with awe. He hated every second of it. Mr. Cross, a soft voice interrupted his thoughts. It was a young woman, perhaps 25 years old, with a simple dress and kind eyes. She held the hand of a small girl. I am Emma Carson, she said. This is my daughter Lily. I wanted to thank you. Thank me for what, ma'am? Marcus Kane killed my husband 8 months ago over a $50 gambling debt. Her eyes filled with tears. I have been afraid every day since then that he would come back and hurt us. You saved us. Elijah felt the familiar weight of being someone's hero. I only defended myself, ma'am, nothing more. But you could have run when it started. You could have hidden. Instead, you stayed. She took his hand. That is what heroes do. After they left, Old Pete came up with a bottle of premium whiskey. From the house, he said, sitting next to Elijah, for saving all of us. I am not a hero, Pete, said Elijah wearily. I am just a tired killer who wanted a quiet drink. Maybe so. Pete poured 2 glasses. But you are the kind of killer the West needs. The kind who protects the innocent. They drank in silence as the sun set. Then Pete asked, What are you going to do now? You cannot stay here. Your name will spread. Others will come looking to make a reputation by defeating the Reaper. Elijah already knew. It was true. The peace he had found was broken again. There is a territory in Colorado, mountains, isolated. Nobody knows me there. Are you going to run again? Not run, just look for another place to try to keep my promise to Sarah. Pete nodded. When are you leaving? At dawn. Then let us drink until then, said Pete, refilling the glasses. To Sarah, to second chances, and to legends who only want peace. Morning came too quickly. Elijah saddled his horse, a gray mare named Mercy, when Sheriff Crawford approached. Leaving, eh? Said Crawford. Time to move on before the next gang arrives looking for me. Smart. Crawford pulled an envelope from his pocket. This arrived for you yesterday by telegraph from the territorial prison in Silver City. Elijah opened it. The message was short, written in shaky handwriting. Mr. Cross, I pleaded guilty to all charges. The judge gave me 20 years, but said with good behavior I could get out in 8. Lawyer Brooks helped me like you said. In prison, I have had time to think about my father, about the choices I made, about the man I want to be when I get out. I am not asking for forgiveness. I know I do not deserve it. I just want you to know that what you said that day changed something in me. You showed me we can be more than our parents, more than our past. When I get out, I am going to try to be better, like you tried to be for Sarah. Thank you for not killing me. Marcus Kane. Elijah carefully folded the letter and tucked it in his coat pocket near his heart. Good news? Asked Crawford. Good news, confirmed Elijah. For the first time in weeks, he smiled genuinely. He mounted Mercy and began riding west, toward Colorado, toward another attempt at peace. The town of Redemption Creek grew smaller behind him. But before leaving town, one last voice stopped him. Mr. Cross, wait. It was Travis, the 19-year-old who had tried to shoot him. His hand was still bandaged from where Elijah's bullet had shattered his weapon. What do you want, boy? Asked Elijah. Travis limped closer. The leg wound was still healing. I want to apologize for everything. I was stupid, arrogant. I thought violence would make me important. And now I know it would only have led me to an early grave. Travis swallowed. Mr. Cross, I spent these 3 weeks thinking. I saw what happened to the boys. I saw how you could have killed us all but chose not to. What is your point? I want to change. I want to be better, but I do not know how. The young man's eyes filled with tears. I have no family. I have nobody to teach me. And I thought maybe you could. No. Elijah interrupted him firmly. I am nobody's teacher. I am not a role model. But you killed 43 men in one night. Boy, I have more blood on my hands than I can wash away in a lifetime. Do not want to be like me. I do not want to be like you were, Travis pressed. I want to be like you are now, a man trying to be better. Elijah studied the young man. He saw genuine desperation, real regret. He saw what he himself had been 20 years ago, lost, broken, seeking redemption. Do you know how to work with cattle? He finally asked. Travis blinked, surprised. A little. I worked on a ranch when I was a boy. There is a man in Colorado. His name is Samuel Whitehorse. He is a horse breeder. Good man. Tell him Elijah Cross sent you. He will give you work, shelter, a chance. But Elijah pulled $50 from his pocket. This will get you there. Use it wisely. And listen to me well, Travis. One chance. If you waste this, if you return to the criminal life, there will not be a third. Travis took the $50 with trembling hands. I will not, sir, I promise. Promises are easy. Keeping them is hard. The young man nodded solemnly. Mr. Cross, how do you do it? How do you live with everything you have done? Elijah looked toward the horizon, toward the mountains that promised a new beginning. You do not live with it. You simply try to make each day count more than the previous one. Try to be a little better than yesterday. He paused. And never, never forget the people you lost along the way. They are what keep you human. Travis limped away, but with purpose in his eyes. Elijah watched him go. Then he spurred Mercy forward. The road to Colorado was long, but for the first time in years, Elijah Cross felt something resembling hope. The landscape changed as he rode, the flat plains giving way to rolling hills, which in turn began to rise into the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. The air grew cooler, cleaner, carrying the scent of pine and snow from the peaks above. Mercy was a good horse, steady and reliable, and she seemed to sense her rider's mood, maintaining a comfortable pace that allowed Elijah to think, to remember, to hope. He thought about Sarah often during the ride, her smile, her laugh, the way she had believed in him even when he could not believe in himself. She had seen past the killer, past the reputation, to the man underneath, and she had loved that man with a fierce devotion that still took his breath away when he remembered it. Her death had broken something inside him, something that he had spent 20 years trying to repair. The 43 men he killed that night were not murdered in cold blood. They were executed swiftly and without mercy, because they had taken from him the only thing that mattered. But Sarah's last words, her plea for him to find peace, had haunted him ever since. 5 years later, the small ranch stretched across a Colorado valley, surrounded by majestic mountains that touched the sky. It was a place where the world seemed to have forgotten about time, where days passed marked only by the sun and the seasons. Elijah Cross was 62 years old now. His beard was completely white, his hands marked by arthritis. He could no longer draw a weapon with the speed of before. He was no longer the Reaper. He was just a man. "Mr. Cross," a young voice called from the stable. Travis, now 24 years old, with muscles from honest work and clear eyes, emerged carrying 2 buckets of milk. After working with Samuel Whitehorse for 2 years, he had saved enough to buy the land next to Elijah's. Now they were neighbors, almost family. "The cows are ready for market," said Travis. "We should get a good price this year." "Good work, boy." Elijah smiled from his rocking chair on the porch. He could no longer do the heavy work, but Travis never made him feel useless. A rider appeared on the horizon. Elijah tensed instinctively, his hand moving toward where he used to hang his weapon. But he no longer carried weapons. He had buried them with his old life. The rider approached. It was a well-dressed man about 30 years old with a face that Elijah recognized immediately. Marcus Kane. But this was not the same Marcus he had left in Redemption Creek. This man had peaceful eyes, a genuine smile. He dismounted and extended his hand. "Mr. Cross, I got out 2 months ago. Good behavior, like you said." Elijah shook his hand firmly. "You look good, son." "I feel good." Marcus pulled a photograph from his pocket. "I met someone, a schoolteacher. Her name is Anne. We got married last week." In the photo, Marcus stood next to a beautiful woman, both smiling genuinely. It was the smile of someone who had found peace. "I bought a ranch in New Mexico," continued Marcus. "I am going to raise horses. Honest life, quiet life." "Sarah would have been proud," said Elijah, his voice breaking slightly. "I came to say thank you for showing me I did not have to be my father, for giving me a second chance." The 3 men, the old killer, the reformed youth, and the redeemed criminal, sat on the porch as the sun set over the mountains. They drank coffee, not whiskey. They shared stories of their new lives, not their old crimes. And for the first time in 20 years, Elijah Cross felt that he had finally fulfilled his promise to Sarah. The years that followed were peaceful in a way that Elijah had never imagined possible. The ranch prospered under Travis's management, with Elijah providing wisdom and guidance from his rocking chair. They raised cattle and horses, selling them at fair prices to honest buyers. The community that grew up around them was small but tight-knit, made up of people who asked no questions about pasts and judged only present actions. Elijah became known as a kind old man who was good with animals and told interesting stories, though he carefully edited those stories to remove the violence and death that had defined so much of his life. Children from neighboring ranches would visit, and Elijah would teach them to ride, to care for horses, to respect the land and the animals. He never taught them to shoot, never spoke of guns or killing, never glorified the violence that had made him a legend. Marcus Kane visited twice a year, bringing his growing family. He and Anne had 3 children in quick succession, 2 boys and a girl, And Marcus was a devoted father in a way his own father never had been. He built a successful horse ranch in New Mexico, developing a reputation for breeding strong, intelligent animals and for treating his workers fairly. He never wore a gun again, never spoke of his time as an outlaw, and when people asked about the scar on his face from where Elijah had pistol-whipped him that night in the saloon, he said only that it was a reminder of the man he used to be and never wanted to be again. Travis married Samuel Whitehorse's daughter, a strong, intelligent woman named Running Deer, and they had 7 children who filled the valley with laughter and life. Travis became a pillar of the community, serving on the town council and helping to build the school where his children and the children of other settlers learned to read and write and calculate. He never forgot the second chance Elijah had given him, and he spent his life paying that gift forward, helping other young men who had lost their way find a path to redemption. The seasons turned, one after another, and Elijah grew older. His hair became thinner, his back more bent, his hands more gnarled with arthritis. He spent more time in his rocking chair, less time riding Mercy across the ranch. But his mind remained sharp, and his eyes, though dimmed by age, still saw clearly. He watched Travis's children grow, watched Marcus's family expand, watched the community around him thrive and prosper. And he thought often of Sarah, speaking to her in the quiet moments, telling her about the life he had built, about the men he had saved instead of killed, about the peace he had finally found. He liked to think she could hear him, that somewhere beyond death she knew he had kept his promise, that the Reaper had finally laid down his weapons and become simply Elijah, a man who had lived and loved and lost and somehow found his way back to himself. On clear nights, he would sit on his porch and look up at the stars, and he would remember that night in Tombstone Creek, the flames, the screams, Sarah's hand reaching for his through the smoke. The memory no longer filled him with rage or the need for vengeance. Instead, it filled him with a profound sadness for all that had been lost, but also with gratitude for all that he had found in the years since. Elijah Cross died 10 years after settling in Colorado at the age of 72 in his bed, surrounded by peace. Marcus Kane and Travis were at his side when he closed his eyes for the last time. There was no large funeral, no speech about the legendary Reaper of Tombstone Creek. Just 2 men burying a third on the hill overlooking the valley. The gravestone that Marcus and Travis placed was simple. Elijah Cross, 1793 to 1865, beloved husband of Sarah, remembered not for what he destroyed, but for what he saved. Below, in smaller letters, Travis had added, "He taught me it is never too late to choose peace." The legend of the Reaper faded with time, replaced by new stories, fresher violence. But in a small valley in Colorado, 3 prosperous ranches remained as silent testimony, not of a legendary gunfighter, but of a man who chose again and again to be better than his past. Marcus Kane lived to be 65 years old. He had 5 children, all of them teachers or doctors. None of them ever touched a gun. Travis married Samuel Whitehorse's daughter. They had 7 children. He taught them that second chances are sacred and that redemption is always possible. And on quiet nights, when the wind blew through the valley, the old-timers of the town swore they could hear the echo of a promise fulfilled. I stopped killing and found peace. The Reaper had finally rested, and the West was a little better for it. The legacy of Elijah Cross lived on not in the 43 men he killed that terrible night in Tombstone Creek, but in the lives he touched afterward, in the men he chose not to kill, in the second chances he gave to those who did not deserve them, but needed them desperately. Marcus Kane's children grew up hearing stories not of their grandfather's crimes, but of their father's redemption, of the old man who showed mercy when he could have shown only death. They learned that people can change, that past mistakes do not have to define future actions, that redemption is possible for anyone willing to seek it sincerely. Travis's children learned similar lessons, growing up in a community built on principles of honesty, hard work, and forgiveness. They knew their father had once been an outlaw, but they also knew he had become one of the most respected men in the territory through his dedication to being better than he once was. The valley prospered, the ranches grew, and the community expanded. A town grew up around the 3 original ranches, with a general store, a blacksmith, a church, and eventually a school. The town was named Cross Valley after Elijah, though he protested the honor, saying he did not deserve to have anything named after him. But the townsfolk insisted, not because of his legend as the Reaper, but because of the man he had been in his final years. The man who had shown them all that violence was not the only answer, that mercy was not weakness, that peace was worth fighting for in its own way. Years turned into decades, and the story of the Reaper became confused with other legends mixed with other tales, until few remembered the real Elijah Cross. But those who had known him, who had been touched by his mercy and his wisdom, they remembered. They told their children and grandchildren about the old man with the white beard who sat on his porch and spoke of peace, who had once been the most dangerous man in the West but chose to become something better. They spoke of how he faced down 8 armed men while unarmed himself, how he could have killed them all but chose not to, how he gave second chances to men who had tried to kill him, humiliate him, destroy him. And in those stories, in that legacy of mercy and redemption, Elijah Cross finally found the peace that had eluded him for so long. The peace was not in forgetting what he had done, not in pretending the blood on his hands had never existed, but in accepting it, learning from it, and choosing every day to be better than he had been. That was his final gift to Sarah, the promise fulfilled not just in the stopping of killing, but in the active choosing of life, of growth, of forgiveness, of love. The whiskey they had poured on him that night in the saloon, meant to humiliate and destroy him, had instead washed away the last remnants of the Reaper, revealing the man underneath, the man Sarah had loved, the man Elijah had always wanted to be. And that man, freed at last from the weight of his past, had built something beautiful in the years remaining to him, a community, a family of choice if not blood, and a legacy that would outlive any legend of violence and death. The mountains of Colorado stood eternal watch over Cross Valley, and beneath them, in the small cemetery on the hill, Elijah Cross slept at last, his promise kept, his peace earned, his rest deserved. And if sometimes on quiet nights the wind seemed to carry the echo of a woman's voice saying, "Thank you, my love," well, perhaps that was just the wind, or perhaps it was something more, something that transcended death and time and all the blood that had been spilled, a love that endured beyond all ending, a promise that was finally, completely, beautifully fulfilled.